In this video, we're going to take a look at what's new in Fusion 360 for November 2022. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to do a quick update of 3 of the new changes to Fusion 360 for the November 2022 update. Now, I should note that we're not covering all of the what's new, all of the updates. There were changes to manufacturing, simulation, electronics, and drawings and generative design. We're not going to be covering any of that, but we're going to focus on is 3 things that we have talked about on this channel before. We've used in several different cases, and I just want to simply go over what has changed with those tools and if that even matters at all. So the first thing that I want to highlight is what's new in automated modeling. This is something that was added in the last major release of Fusion 360, and it's a pretty cool tool. It's something that allows you to generate concept shapes based on some areas where you want to connect and some areas you want to avoid. Now, this on the surface looks like generative design, but of course it's not. If you have no idea what this tool is, essentially what we're doing is we're taking an automated approach to connecting geometry together while avoiding obstacles. Unlike generative design, it does not take into account materials, manufacturing methods, or load cases. It's simply creating geometry. Now, the benefit of this is that we can quickly get some concept shapes for ideas and then begin manipulating or basing our designs off of them. This does not require any cloud credits or tokens to use, and it currently is in preview, so you need to go into your user preferences and activate it. The new change that just happened in November was the slider that appears next to the alternatives. The slider allows us to increase or decrease the thickness of the design. And this is nice because it gives us a little bit of control over the design. And again, this is essentially a starting point for us. So if you want to manipulate or modify these, you now have the slider, which allows you to increase or decrease the section between each of these. In this case, I'm going to call them preserves. It's essentially what they are. When we select OK, it's going to again generate our form body. It's going to generate a boundary fill, and it's going to generate a combine. This is exactly how it works inside of generative design. Now, there are a couple things that I do want to mention with this tool. At this point, it's not instantly apparent that it is symmetric, but it does use symmetry when it's creating these designs if your models are symmetric. Now, what that means is that you can create your initial designs, in this case, the areas you want to connect, in a symmetric fashion about a plane. In this case, I created them about the XY plane and just simply mirrored them across or extruded them as a symmetric body. Now, again, this is not instantly apparent because there's no option to toggle on or off symmetry, and you slightly get a different result when you talk about using just half of the design. Something that you might do in practice is create half of your design. Now, what I think is very nice about this tool is the quick way that we can explore this functionality. Where I think it could use a little bit more work is also an area that we see inside of generative design. When you create your obstacles, the end result has this combined feature, which essentially takes away those initial obstacles and just subtracts them from your design. Now, what you end up getting are things like these little cuts and notches. Now, generative design is fixing this problem by creating an offset obstacle, and that's not really available in automated modeling. However, you can go back before the combine feature and usually take care of that. Or Fusion 360 is pretty good about patching geometry, so we can select the geometry and use the delete tool and allow it to just heal that geometry. It doesn't work in all cases, but it is relatively good at doing that. So once again, selecting geometry, hitting delete, and allowing it to try to patch those features often works. When it doesn't, you do have the option to go back before the combine or potentially modify the combine feature altogether. So that's a quick look at automated modeling. Let's take a look at the next example. Now, Fusion 360 has had joints for a while, and joints are the way in which we combine components together to replicate our mechanical motion. This works because each component has its own coordinate system, and Fusion keeps track of the orientation and position of those. We've already done a bunch of videos on creating suspension examples for cars, talking about things like bump steer and setting up components that are completely empty and just have a couple reference sketches. But what I want to talk about is the change that happened to joints. Now, it's not new functionality, it's just consolidated functionality. In the past, when you created a joint, either an as-built joint or a joint, you had the option to create the joint based on whatever mechanical motion you wanted, and then you had to go find the joint inside of the browser, right-click, and edit the motion limits. When we were editing the limits, this is always an extra step that we had to take, but now we have the ability to do that when we create the joint initially. So again, it's not new functionality, but there's a little drop down that appears at the bottom of the joint dialog that allows you to determine whether or not you want to include those joint limits. So while that's a very welcomed addition, it's not new functionality. It just happened to move into that dialog. It's still in the same location as well. When you right click, you can still go in and edit those limits, but right now it's just simply available in another dialog. In the future, I don't know if that dialog and the right-click edit joint limits or edit motion limits will be there, but for right now, they both still exist. The last thing that I want to mention has to do with parameters. Now, parameters are very important to parametric design, whether or not you use the modify or change parameters options. Now, one thing that happened here is the dialog looks completely different. Now, the functionality is still exactly the same, but what we see is a different user interface, a different look to this dialog. We still have the option to toggle on favorites, and we can move any parameters that we want into the favorites. The two main things have changed here. One is that we now have a filter bar. Now, filter bars generally are very useful when you have a big complex design. In this case, let's say that we wanted to filter based on the term gate. You can see that it filters based on the name of our parameter, but it also filters based on the fact that it could be inside of the expression. The second thing that changed is the way in which we create a new parameter. Now, in the past, we had a little plus icon next to the user parameter section. If you happen to start a new design that doesn't have any parameters in it, you no longer have that plus icon next to the user parameters. You need to hit plus user parameter at the top. Again, the functionality is still exactly the same, but it looks a little bit different. The dialog's been updated, and we now have this filter parameters. So those are the three main things that have changed in Fusion 360 for 2022, but that's not all that changed. Those are only the things that we cover here on the channel. If you are using generative design, if you're using drawings, if you're using electronics or manufacturing, there are a lot of different changes that have happened in those areas, and I do suggest that you do take a look at the what's new for the product update. I'll leave a link in the description of this video so you can just navigate to that. You can always go to your help section in Fusion 360 and take a look at what's new, and that'll take you to that same section as well. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.